At times, it broke me. 5 words, 12 years, and the end of a dream that started with a kid from Melbourne who left everything behind to chase greatness in red and white. G'day Swans fans, if you love this club like I do, hit that subscribe button, because today we're talking about one of our own, and this one hurts. Zach Jones has announced his retirement from the AFL. The 30-year-old midfielder who gave us 90 games in the red and white has hung up the boots after 164 games across 16 seasons. And the way he's done it, with raw honesty that most players would never dare show, has left the footy world absolutely stunned. This isn't just another retirement announcement. This is a player looking back at his career and admitting something most blokes would rather bury. That the game he loved nearly broke him. That the fairy tale he dreamed of as a kid never came true. That despite giving everything he had, it still wasn't enough. For Swans supporters, this hits different, because Zach Jones wasn't just a player we drafted, he was one of us. A Melbourne kid who packed his bags, left his family behind, and moved to Sydney to become a Swan. He gave us some brilliant moments. And then, just when it felt like he was becoming the player we all knew he could be, he left. But to understand why this retirement hit so hard, we need to go back to where it all started. November 2013, the National Draft. Pick 15. The Sydney Swans select Zach Jones, a hard-nosed midfielder from Sandringham Dragons with a reputation for attack on the footy and an engine that just wouldn't quit. He was 18 years old, and he was about to leave home for the first time in his life. Think about that for a second. You're a teenager. You've just been drafted to play AFL football, which is already mental enough. But you're not going to play for Collingwood or Essendon, the clubs you grew up watching. You're going to Sydney. Different city, different culture, different life. And as Zach himself admitted in his retirement post, leaving home was one of the hardest things I've ever done. But he did it anyway, because that's what you do when you get the chance to play for the Sydney Swans. The early years weren't easy. He played just 5 games in his debut season, 7 the next year. The competition for spots in that Swans midfield was brutal. You had Kennedy, Hanbury, Parker, Jack, all fighting for the same minutes. But Zach kept his head down and kept working. Then came 2016, breakthrough year. 21 games. He was starting to show what he could do. Those desperate dives on the footy, the tackles that made opposition players think twice, the willingness to put his head over the ball when others wouldn't. By 2017 and 2018, he was a regular in the side. Consistent, reliable, the kind of player coaches love because you know exactly what you're going to get. 22 games in 17, 18 in 18. He'd made it. He was a proper AFL footballer playing for one of the game's most storied clubs. But behind the scenes, something was pulling at him. Home, family, Victoria. In 2019, Zach Jones requested a trade. He wanted to go back to Melbourne, and not just to any club, to St Kilda, the team he'd barracked for as a kid, the Saints he'd grown up watching, the club he dreamed of playing for before the Swans gave him his shot. For Swans supporters, it stung. We'd watched this kid develop. We'd seen him battle through the tough years, the games in the reserves, the uncertainty. And just when he'd established himself, he wanted out. But here's the thing, and this is important. No one could really blame him. Footy's a dream, but family's forever. And sometimes home calls you back. The trade went through. St Kilda welcomed him with open arms. And for Zach Jones, it must have felt like everything was finally falling into place. Except it wasn't. COVID hits. The season gets shortened. Everything's chaos. But Zach Jones, he was brilliant. 16 games, 37 coaches' votes, a career high. St Kilda made finals, and he was right in the thick of it. This was it. This was the fairy tale. Home at the club he'd always loved, playing some of the best footy of his career. 2021 was even better on paper. Career high averages across the board. 23.4 disposals, 4.2 clearances, 5.3 score involvements per game. The numbers don't lie. Zach Jones was cooking. And then his body started betraying him. Injuries, the worst enemy of any professional athlete. The thing you can't control, can't fight through, can't just will yourself past. His body, after years of throwing itself at the contest, after countless games of putting his head over the footy, started breaking down. From 2022 onwards, he couldn't string games together. No more than 16 in a season, and that was in his first year at the club. After that, even less. The frustration must have been unbelievable. You're fit enough to train, you're good enough to play, but your body won't cooperate. Imagine that. You're home, you're playing for the club you love, you've shown what you can do, and your body just won't let you do it anymore. Week after week, watching from the sidelines, rehabbing, getting close, breaking down again. The cycle that every injured player knows too well. The one that slowly chips away at your confidence, your identity, your love for the game. Could anyone have prevented it? Could Zach have done anything differently? Or was this just the cruel reality of professional sport? That sometimes, despite doing everything right, your body has other plans? What would you have done in his position when the game you've sacrificed everything for starts taking more than it gives? The announcement came on Instagram. Simple, honest, devastating. If I'm being honest, my career didn't finish with the fairy tale I once imagined. Swans supporters who'd watched his journey from the start felt it immediately. This wasn't the retirement we wanted for him. No farewell game, no lap of honour, no chance to say goodbye properly. St Kilda delisted him at the end of 2025 as part of a list overhaul, and just like that, his AFL career was over. The comments flooded in. Former teammates, fans from both clubs, people who'd watched him battle for over a decade. The overwhelming sentiment was respect, admiration, and a touch of heartbreak. Because here's what made this different. Zach didn't pretend. He didn't put out some cookie-cutter statement about grateful opportunities and exciting new chapters. Well, he did mention those things, but he also said what most retired players won't say. At times, it broke me. You could feel the weight of those words, the years of frustration, the injuries that wouldn't heal, the dream that slowly slipped away despite every effort to hold on to it, the realization that sometimes trying your absolute hardest still isn't enough.
Luke Parker, one of his former Swans teammates, commented almost immediately. So did others who'd been in the trenches with him, because they knew, they'd seen what it cost him. Not just the physical toll, but the mental and emotional price of fighting a battle you know you're going to lose. St Kilda fans, many of whom had high hopes when he first arrived, expressed their disappointment that injuries robbed him of his best years in red, white and black. He'd shown glimpses of what he could be in 2020 and 2021. They'd seen the player Sydney fans had raved about. And then they watched as his body let him down, over and over again. There's something deeply human about this story. It's not about off-field drama or controversial exits. It's about a bloke who gave everything to a sport that gave him incredible highs and crushing lows. And in the end, he had to walk away on terms that weren't his own. "I'm most proud that I never stopped fighting," he wrote. "No matter what was thrown at me, I kept showing up." That's the part that hits hardest, not the wins or the stats or the highlight reels. The fact that he kept showing up, even when it would have been easier to walk away, even when his body was screaming at him to stop, even when the fairy tale was clearly not going to have a happy ending. This story reminds me of every player who's had their career cut short by injury. Demetrio, Goods in his final year battling to stay on the park. McVeigh pushing through when his body was done. The difference is, those blokes got to retire on their own terms, as champions with the club they loved. Zach didn't get that, and maybe that's why this hurts so much for Swans fans who remember him. We drafted him, we developed him, we watched him grow from a teenager who'd left home for the first time into a genuine AFL midfielder. And then he left, not because he didn't love the club, but because he loved home more. There's no villain in this story. Sydney gave him his opportunity and the culture that shaped him. St Kilda gave him the chance to come home. His body gave him a few brilliant years before it gave out. And Zach? He gave everything he had until there was nothing left to give. Looking at his career, you see 164 games across 12 seasons. That's not a failure. That's a professional AFL career that most kids would dream of having. But when you're the one living it, when you're the one whose body breaks down before you're ready to stop, those numbers probably feel different. What happens next for Zach Jones? He doesn't know. He admitted that in his post. I don't know exactly what comes next, and that's scary, but it's also exciting. 30 years old, his playing days over, a lifetime ahead. For the first time since he was 18, he's not a professional footballer. Who is Zach Jones when he's not putting on the boots every week? That's the question thousands of retired players face, and most of them struggle with the answer. Your identity, your routine, your purpose, all gone overnight, and you're supposed to just move on, start again, figure out who you are without the game that defined you. The honest truth is, most footballers aren't prepared for retirement. They certainly aren't prepared for retirement at 30 when there's still so much they wanted to achieve. Zach's got decades ahead of him to find a new path, but right now, in this moment, I bet it feels like the end of the world. At the end of the day, Zach Jones' story is about sacrifice, about leaving home to chase a dream, about giving everything you have to a game that doesn't always give it back, about the brutal reality that sometimes your best isn't enough, not because you didn't try, but because life had other plans. For Swans supporters, he'll always be one of ours. 90 games in red and white, a kid from Melbourne who became a Swan. And even though he left, even though the ending wasn't what any of us wanted, he earned his place in our history. This is what being a footy fan is all about. The highs, the lows, and everything in between. The players who give us joy and the ones whose stories break our hearts. The careers that soar and the ones that end too soon. Zach Jones gave everything he had to this game. And even though he's walking away with regrets, with what-ifs, with a fairy tale that never quite came to true, he's walking away with his head held high. Because he never stopped fighting. And that's something worth celebrating. Let me know in the comments, what's your favourite memory of Zach Jones in the red and white? Hit like if you're wishing him nothing but the best in whatever comes next, and I'll see you in the next one.